I was 17 the night I found him. The rain was the kind that comes down without patience, soaking everything before you have time to decide whether to run for cover. I had been walking home from my evening class, the one my father did not know I attended, because my father had opinions about young women who stayed out past dark and acted on those opinions loudly. The alley was a shortcut I had used 100 times. That night it was not empty. He was on the ground. A man in a dark suit that had probably been expensive before whatever had happened to him had happened. He was not moving in the way of someone unconscious. He was moving in the small, careful way of someone who was very badly hurt and was conserving every resource available to them for the single purpose of staying alive. I should have run. Every sensible part of my 17-year-old brain was telling me to run. This part of the city had its rules, and one of its rules was that when you found a man bleeding in an alley, you did not stop to ask questions because the people who had put him there were frequently still close by, and you did not want to introduce yourself to them. I did not run. I crouched down beside him. I pressed my scarf against the wound in his side with both hands, the way I had seen done in the first aid class I had taken 2 summers before. I held it there, and I looked at his face, and I saw a man who was maybe 25, with dark eyes that opened briefly and found mine with the specific desperate focus of someone using the last of their concentration. He did not speak. I did not speak either. We stayed like that for what felt like a very long time. Me pressing my scarf against his side in the cold, wet alley with the rain coming down, and him looking at me with those dark eyes that were not afraid, which surprised me. Most people afraid of dying look afraid. He looked like a man who had made his peace with the possibility, and was simply surprised to find someone present for it. His people arrived before he lost consciousness completely. 3 men in dark coats who came from the far end of the alley, moving fast. They saw me and one of them moved toward me with the specific purpose of someone who treats unknown variables as threats, but the man on the ground said something in a voice that was barely a breath, and the man stopped. They lifted him carefully. I stood up. My hands were red. My scarf was gone, pressed against his side as they carried him. He turned his head as they moved him away. He looked at me through the rain. I did not know his name. I did not know that he would spend the next 5 years looking for mine. 5 years passed. I became Alessia Romano Williams, 22 years old, working at my father's import business, engaged to a man named Mike Carver, who had dark hair and easy charm and who my father approved of with an enthusiasm that I had always found slightly more about Mike's financial connections than about my happiness. I had not thought much about that alley in years. I had not thought much about the dark-eyed man either. He had become the kind of memory that sits in the back of the mind without demanding attention, filed under strange things that happened once and were never explained. My father, Hector Romano, mentioned the name Dante Morello occasionally. Not with affection. Dante Morello was, according to my father, the most dangerous man in the city. The head of the Morello crime family. A man whose reputation for ruthlessness was so established that people used his name the way people use the names of storms, as a category of disaster rather than a person. He had a hand in your brother's death, my father told me once. Luca had died 2 years before in what the police called a street robbery gone wrong. My father had his own theories about who was responsible, and Dante Morello featured prominently in those theories. I believed my father because my father was my father and because grief makes belief easy when the belief gives the grief somewhere to go. Mike was sympathetic about Luca. He held my hand when I cried. He said the right things at the right moments with the consistency of someone who had learned exactly what the right things were. I loved him. Or I thought I did. Looking back now, I understand that what I felt for Mike was the specific warmth of being chosen by someone who seemed certain, and that certainty felt like safety when everything else felt fragile. We set the wedding date for a Saturday in spring. I spent 3 months preparing for it with the focused energy of a woman who believes she is building the beginning of her real life. I was building nothing of the kind. But I did not know that yet. The cathedral was full. I stood at the back in my dress with my father beside me, and I breathed carefully, and I told myself that the slight tightness in my chest was nerves and not information. The organ began. My father walked me down the aisle. Mike stood at the altar in a gray suit, looking exactly as handsome as he always looked and smiling at me with exactly the smile I had seen on our first date and every significant occasion since. The smile that had always felt like something designed rather than something felt, but which I had been telling myself for 2 years, was simply the way he expressed himself. We were halfway down the aisle when the cathedral doors burst open. Not quietly, not politely. The doors came open with the specific force of someone who had made a decision and was not interested in discussing it. Men came through first, dressed in dark suits, moving with the controlled efficiency of people who had done similar things before and had learned to do them without unnecessary drama. They fanned out along the sides of the cathedral with the systematic calm of a security operation. Then he walked in. I knew him immediately. Not from any logical process. Not from a name or a description. From something older than logic. From the specific recognition that lives in a part of the brain that processes information, the rest of the brain hasn't caught up to yet. Dark eyes. The same dark eyes that had looked at me through the rain in an alley 5 years ago. The same face, older now, sharpened by whatever the years between had required of him. He was taller than I remembered. He wore his authority the way some men wear expensive clothing, not displayed but present, something you felt before you consciously registered it. He walked down the aisle of my wedding with the unhurried certainty of a man walking through a room he owns. The priest had stopped speaking. Mike had gone very still at the altar. Dante Morello reached the place where my father and I had stopped walking because my legs had made a decision before my mind had, and the decision was to stop. He looked at me. "You're marrying the wrong man," he said. His voice was low enough that it was almost only for me. "And I cannot let that happen. Who are you to tell me he killed your brother?" he said. "Mike Carver arranged your brother's death. I have the evidence. I have been trying to reach you for weeks." I thought about the anonymous messages I had received. The ones I had burned because my father said Dante Morello sent threats. "And you did not engage with threats from men like that." "You're lying," I said. "Lesia." My name in his mouth had a quality I could not name. Like he had said it before, privately, many times. "I am not lying. But I cannot prove it to you here. And I cannot let you walk to that altar." Mike had come down from the altar. His face had changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. The composed, handsome face had developed a tightness around the jaw that I had not seen before. "Get away from my fiancé," Mike said. Dante looked at him. Whatever Mike saw in that look made him stop walking toward us. "Come with me," Dante said to me. "You have my word. Nothing will happen to you or your father." "Your word," I said. "The word of a man who..." "The man who spent 5 years looking for the girl who held his wounds in an alley in the rain," he said quietly. "Do you remember?" The cathedral was completely silent. I looked at him. My heart was doing something I had no framework for. "If she doesn't come willingly," Dante said, raising his voice slightly, addressing the room, "I will have a different conversation with Mr. Carver about what he owes me. And with Mr. Romano about certain business arrangements he may not be aware of." My father had gone pale. Mike had not moved. I looked at Dante Morello, the man my father said was a killer, the man I had been told was responsible for my brother's death, standing in my wedding dress in the cathedral where I was supposed to begin my real life. 2 days, Dante said to me. "Give me 2 days to show you what I know. After that, if you want to go back to him, I will not stop you." I looked at Mike. Mike's jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing something I had not seen before. Not fear exactly. Calculation. The rapid calculation of someone managing variables. I did not know then that this was the face of someone whose plan was developing complications. "I know it now." 2 days, I said. I walked out of my own wedding. The Morello estate was not what I expected. I had constructed a version of it in my mind on the drive over. Dark. Fortress-like. The kind of place that confirmed everything I believed about the man who owned it. It was none of those things. It was a large house, well-maintained, with a garden that someone tended carefully, and a library on the 2nd floor that had more books than I had seen in a private home before. The staff were efficient and respectful, and none of them looked at me with anything except the polite attention of people doing their jobs. My room was not a cell. It was larger than my room at my father's house, with a window that looked out over the garden, and a bathroom attached, and a wardrobe someone had stocked with clothes in my size that I found both impressive and unsettling. I tried to leave on the first evening. Not through the front door. I was not that naive. Through the garden and the low wall at the eastern edge that I had identified from the window. I made it to the wall. Two men materialized from the garden shadows with a specific apologetic professionalism of people who were not going to hurt me but were also absolutely not going to let me go over that wall. I went back inside. I found Dante in the library. He was reading. Sitting in the chair by the window with a book and a glass of something dark, and not looking like a man who had kidnapped a woman from her wedding earlier that day. He looked up when I came in. The wall on the eastern side, he said, has been the same height since the house was built. You are the second person to attempt it this month. Who was the first? Yes. My cousin, he said. He owed me money. I looked at him. This is illegal, I said. Several things I do are illegal, he said. This is the one I feel the least apologetic about. 'Cause you think you're protecting me. 'Cause I know I am. I sat in the chair across from him because standing while he was sitting felt like a concession I was not prepared to make. And there was nowhere else in the room to project the appropriate level of outrage. You said you have evidence, I said. Show me. He showed me the following morning. Not because he made me wait to be difficult. Because the files he had assembled were extensive, and he wanted me to have the time and the context to understand what I was looking at, rather than processing it cold. I spent 4 hours with those files. By the end of the 4th hour, I understood 3 things. The first was that Mike Carver had significant gambling debts spread across 3 different organizations. The second was that he had known my father would never agree to the marriage without extensive relationship building, and had invested 2 years in exactly that, positioning himself as a respectable man with legitimate prospects. The third was the part that made my hands shake on the pages. Luca, my brother. The street robbery that the police had never fully explained had a different explanation in Dante's files. Name, payment, timeline that tracked back to Mike. Luca had found out about Mike's debts. Luca had confronted Mike. Luca had told Mike he was going to tell me and our father. Luca had not had the chance. I sat with those pages in my hands for a long time. Dante did not say anything. He sat across the room and let me sit with it, and did not try to fill the silence with anything because he had the specific understanding of someone who knew that some information required space, and that offering comfort before the space had been taken was a way of making the comfort about the giver rather than the receiver. How long have you known? Finally said. About Mike. 14 months, he said. About you being connected to him. 6 months. I sent warnings. I came to the restaurant where you were having dinner with your father 3 weeks ago. I had one of my men deliver a message to your apartment. I remembered the messages. I had burned them. My father said you sent threats, I said. Your father, Dante said carefully, has reasons of his own for wanting me to appear as a certain kind of person to you. I looked at him. What reasons? He looked at me. There was something in his expression, consideration, the careful weighing of how much truth to deliver at once. That conversation, he said, can wait until you have processed this one. I looked back at the files. Thought about Luca. About his laugh and his specific way of eating cereal standing at the kitchen counter because he said sitting down for cereal was a waste of a posture. About the last time I saw him 3 days before he died when he had seemed distracted, and I had asked him if everything was all right and he had said fine, just work stuff, the way he always said fine when things were not fine. He had been trying to protect me. He had died trying to protect me. And the man I had been about to marry had arranged it. Dante, I said. He looked at me. Thank you, I said, for showing me this. He nodded once. Then he went back to his book. I sat in the library for another hour, and I looked at the garden through the window, and I thought about the alley and the rain and the 17-year-old girl who had stayed because she could not walk away from someone who needed help. Thought he did the same thing. I did not say this out loud. But I thought it. I did not leave after 2 days. Not because he locked the doors. He had said 2 days, and on the morning of the 3rd day the car was waiting and he came to find me and said it was there when I was ready and that he would arrange whatever I needed. I told him I needed more time. He nodded. He did not ask what I needed more time for. He understood that I was not ready to go back to a world that had just revealed itself to be considerably different from the one I had been navigating, and that readiness was something that arrived in its own time rather than on a schedule. I stayed. I watched him. I watched him the way I had learned to watch important things, carefully, without announcing that I was watching, gathering information over time rather than demanding it all at once. He managed his organization from the estate with the systematic efficiency of someone who had been doing it long enough that the management had become second nature. He was demanding with his people in the way of someone who had high standards rather than the way of someone who used authority for its own pleasure. I saw him correct people without humiliating them. I saw him make decisions quickly when speed was required and slowly when accuracy mattered more. I saw him in the garden in the early mornings. Not managing, just there, walking along the path between the rose beds with his hands in his pockets, and his face carrying the expression of a man who was somewhere else in his mind, and who found the garden a useful place to be somewhere else. I asked Sarah, one of the household staff who had decided early that I was worth being kind to, how long the roses had been there. He planted them 7 years ago, Sarah said. When his mother died. She loved roses. I looked at the garden differently after that. The rule about Mike came up on the 8th day. Dante came to find me in the library, where I had taken to spending my mornings. There are very few things I am asking of you, he said. He sat across from me the way he always sat when we talked, attentively but without pressure. Most of them are about your safety. The one I need you to understand most clearly is this. Do not contact Mike Carver. Do not meet him. Not without telling me first. I looked at him. You think he would hurt me? I think he is a man who has already demonstrated what he is willing to do when he feels cornered, Dante said. And right now, you represent a significant threat to everything he has built. I think he would hurt you. Thought about Luca. Understand, I said. He looked at me. You are angry about the rule. I am not angry, I said. I just do not like being told what I can and cannot do. I know, he said. That is one of the things he stopped. One of the things I have learned about you. I looked at him across the library. How have you learned things about me? Yes. You said you spent 5 years looking for me. He was quiet for a moment. Come with me, he said. He took me to a room on the 2nd floor that I had not been in before. It was smaller than the library and had the quality of a space that was private in a way the rest of the house was not. One wall was photographs. Not surveillance photographs. Ordinary ones. Me at the market buying flowers. Me outside the restaurant where I worked on weekends during university. Luca and I at a street festival 2 summers before his death. Both of us laughing at something outside the frame. And sketches. Dozens of them pinned alongside the photographs. Detailed, careful. Done by someone who had been looking at the same face for a long time and had learned its specific angles. You drew these, I said. I looked at the wall for a long time. I stopped. I did not have the word that was accurate. This is a lot. I know how it looks, he said. His voice was completely even. I'm not going to pretend it is ordinary. I've been looking for you for 5 years. I found the girl from the alley in pieces. A description here, a connection there. When I finally understood who you were already with Mike. He paused. I tried to warn you through every channel available to me before I chose the one I used at the cathedral. I looked at the photographs. I looked at the sketch of Luca and me at the festival. You knew Luca, I said. I knew of him, Dante said. I found out what happened to him 4 months after you were already with Mike. I'm sorry I was not faster. I stood in that room for a long time. Then I walked out. I went to the garden. I walked along the path between the roses with my hands at my sides, and I breathed the morning air. And I thought about 5 years and a wall of photographs and a man who planted roses for his mother. I thought about the alley and the rain and the hand I had held because I could not walk away. I was beginning to understand that he had felt the same thing. Mike called on a Thursday morning. I was in my room. The phone Dante had given me was for contacts he had vetted, which meant it should not have received a call from Mike's number. I found out later that Mike had used a different number, one of several he had apparently been operating for reasons that were now entirely clear. I looked at the number on the screen. I knew I should not answer. answered. Lesia. His voice. The same voice I had heard say my name 1,000 times. Warm, familiar, carrying the specific emotional weight of something I had once loved. Thank God. I've been so worried. Are you safe? I'm fine, I said. You have to get out of there, he said. He sounded frightened. Genuinely frightened. Or the performance of genuine fright so accomplished that my body responded to it before my mind had time to apply the analysis I had been developing over 2 weeks of living with Dante's files. Alessia, Dante Morello killed your father. I went completely still. What? Your father called me, Mike said. His voice was urgent and broken, and hitting every frequency of the voice of a man in genuine distress. He said he had found out something about Morello, and he needed to meet me. He said Morello had been making threats against the family. I went to him. Alessia, when I arrived. He stopped. A silence that was perfectly calculated. My voice was barely a breath. Where is my father? He asked me to get you out, Mike said. He said to tell you to come to the old warehouse on Marchetti Road. He said to come alone and not to tell Morello. Everything in my body was telling me not to go. I went. I told myself I would be gone and back before anyone noticed. I told myself that whatever was happening, my father needed me. I told myself that Dante's rule about Mike was a rule made by a mafia boss who had his own reasons for what he asked of me, and that a father in danger was a different category from a social call. I told myself all of these things. None of them were the real reason I went. The real reason was that Mike's voice had reached something in me that 2 weeks of evidence and rose gardens and library conversations had not yet fully replaced, the part that had loved him and had not yet finished grieving what that love had turned out to be. I left through the garden. I found the wall on the eastern side that Dante's men had redirected me from twice before. This time there was only one man. I looked at him. He looked at me. Please, I said. My father. He stepped aside. I do not know if Dante told him to let me go if I asked that directly, or if the man made his own decision. I only know he stepped aside. I went over the wall. The warehouse was dark when I arrived. The building on Marchetti Road had been part of my father's import business years before, back when the business was larger and used more storage. It had been emptied and was sitting unused for 3 years. I knew the layout. I had spent time there as a child when my father brought me to work on school holidays and let me sit on the loading bays eating sandwiches while the men worked. I pushed the door open. My father was inside. He was on the floor, not moving in the way that tells you everything before you have even crossed the distance to reach the person. The absolute stillness of it. The specific quality of absence. I ran to him. I was on my knees beside him when I heard the other sound. Movement on my right. Dante was there, kneeling on my father's other side. His hands were against my father's chest. His face was carrying an expression I had not seen on it before, not the controlled authority or the careful attention, something raw and desperate and entirely unperformed. He looked up and saw me. Lesia, what did you do? My voice did not sound like my voice. It came from somewhere that existed below the part of me that was still thinking. What did you do to him? I received a message, he said. His voice was completely level, in the way of someone who was managing something enormous and holding it precisely. From your father. He said he wanted to speak to me about you. That he had something he needed to tell me in person. Came. He was all ready. Stop talking, I said. Stop lying. Alessia, listen to me. This is a setup. Mike arranged. Said stop. I heard Mike's voice behind me. It's all right, Alessia. He came in from the far door. The door I had not seen in the darkness. He walked toward me with the specific calm of someone arriving at a situation they have arranged. He was holding something. He held it out to me. And this. For your father. For Luca. The gun. I looked at Dante. Dante was looking at me with the dark eyes I had looked into in an alley in the rain when I was 17 years old. He was not afraid. He had the same expression from that night, the expression of a man who had made his peace with whatever was coming. I know you don't believe me right now, he said quietly. Understand why. I'm not going to beg you. But I need you to know that everything I did, from the day I spent 5 years looking for you to the day I walked into your wedding, was because I could not let you be destroyed by a man who has been destroying everyone who got close to the truth about him. You killed my father, I said. No, he said. I did not. I looked at the gun in my hand. I looked at Mike. Mike was watching me with the expression I should have recognized months ago. Not grief. Not urgency. The patient, satisfied expression of a man watching a plan arrive at its conclusion. And then I saw it. On the floor, near my father's left hand. Scarf. Navy blue with a small gold pattern. Silk. I had bought that scarf for Mike 6 months ago. He had been wearing it the day we got engaged. He had worn it dozens of times since. I had seen it in his wardrobe 2 weeks before the wedding. It was lying beside my father's body, covered in something dark. Blood spray. The kind that happens when a gun is fired at close range, and the person holding it is close enough to the target that the discharge catches the fabric. Mike had been wearing that scarf when he killed my father. I heard him realize I had seen it. The expression changed. Not dramatically. The patient's satisfaction was replaced by something colder and more honest. The face of a man who has stopped performing because the performance has been interrupted. You wore it, I said. My voice was very quiet. You wore it and you came here first and then you called me. He looked at the scarf. Then he looked at me. And he laughed. Not a small laugh. A genuine one. The kind of laugh that belongs to someone who finds a situation genuinely funny in the way that only people without functioning empathy find genuinely funny. Took you long enough, he said. You know, for someone who thought she was so smart. All those warning signs and you kept coming back. He tilted his head. Your brother figured it out in about 48 hours. You took 2 years. Luca, I said. Resourceful boy, Mike said. Unfortunately for him. The gun was still in my hand. He turned it. Mike stopped laughing. Alessia, he said. Think about what you're. I shot him in the leg. Then I reached for my phone and I called the only number I had committed to memory because some part of me, some part that had been listening more carefully than the rest of me, had known that this number mattered. Send medics to the Marchetti Road warehouse, I said when the line connected. Dante has been shot. Come now. I looked at Dante on the floor. He was looking at me. You shot him, Dante said. He was going to kill you, I said. You could have let him. I looked at Dante. The dark eyes. At the man who had held his wound in an alley without asking for help, and had spent 5 years looking for the girl who stayed anyway. No, I said. Couldn't. They took Dante to the hospital and I went with him. Not in the ambulance. In the car behind it because his head of security, a man named Cale, had very specific feelings about who rode in the vehicle with the boss, and I was currently in the category of person whose reliability was being assessed. I understood this and did not argue. I sat in the hospital corridor on a plastic chair, and I pressed my hands flat on my knees and I breathed. I thought about my father. I would grieve him properly. In time. In the way that grief requires, which is not in a hospital corridor in the immediate aftermath of everything, but in the quiet hours later, when the body has finished the emergency processing and the real feeling is allowed to arrive. Right now I was sitting with a different feeling. Guilt. Not the performed guilt of someone who wants to appear remorseful. The real kind. The kind that arrives when you understand precisely how wrong you were about something that mattered. I had almost killed him. I had stood in that warehouse with a gun in my hand, and I had looked at Dante Morello and believed Mike's version of reality, and I had pulled the trigger. I had pulled the trigger. The bullet had caught his shoulder, not his heart. Close enough that the medics in the ambulance had made sounds that I never wanted to hear again. Cale came out of the surgery waiting area at 2 in the morning. He looked at me in the plastic chair. He's asking for you, he said. His voice was flat. The voice of a man who had opinions he was exercising the discipline not to voice. I went in. He was not asking for me. He was unconscious, and the monitors beside him were doing the specific patient work of machines that are managing something serious that the body cannot currently manage for itself. Cale had sent me in anyway. I sat in the chair beside the bed, and I looked at Dante Morello in the hospital bed, and I thought about everything I knew about him that was true, not the version my father had given me, not the version Mike had constructed, but the version I had assembled myself across 2 weeks of careful watching. A man who planted roses for his mother. A man who had spent 5 years looking for a girl he had never spoken to because she had stayed in an alley when she could have run. And that staying had done something to him he had not found a way to undo. A man who had given me a room with a window overlooking the garden and stocked the wardrobe in my size and sat in the library reading while I processed devastating information and did not try to manage my response to it because he understood that my response belonged to me. A man who had said he would let me go if I wanted to go. I reached out. I put my hand over his. I remember the alley, I said. I had remembered it for weeks. I had remembered it the day he showed me the room with a wall of photographs. And I had not said it because I had not been ready for what saying it would mean. I remember your eyes. I remember that you were not afraid. Pause. I was not afraid either. I should have been. I was 17 and I had no idea who you were and I stayed anyway. The monitors beeped. I think I knew even then, I said, that you were someone I could not walk away from. And then I spent 5 years walking away from the memory of it because walking away was easier than admitting that a 17-year-old girl in an alley had understood something that took me until now to be honest about. I looked at his face. I shot you, I said. I'm going to spend a very long time being sorry for that. I know sorry is not sufficient. I know that the specific kind of wrong I did tonight does not resolve with an apology. Pause. But I am going to try to be the kind of person who earns the right to be forgiven for it. If you give me the chance. The room was quiet. I stayed until morning. I was still in the chair when his eyes opened. He looked at the ceiling first. Then at the room. Then at me. I looked back. He raised his right hand slowly. Carefully. With the deliberate movement of someone managing pain. He reached toward my face. His thumb touched my cheek. I had not realized I was crying until he wiped the tear away. You finally looked at me, he said. His voice was rough from the anesthesia. Quiet and real. Not at the Mafia boss. Not at the man your father described. Me. Yes, I said. How does that feel? I thought about the question seriously. Like I should have done it a long time ago, I said. He almost smiled. Then he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. I stayed. Mike was handed over to 3 different organizations he owed money to. Dante did not kill him. He told me this specifically, unprompted, from the hospital bed on the second day of his recovery, and I understood from the specificity of it that he had thought about it and chosen differently and wanted me to know the choice. What will happen to him? Yes. He will spend a long time repaying debts, Dante said. Which is more poetic than a bullet and considerably longer. Thought about Luca. I thought about my father. Is it enough? Yes. I sat with the question. No, I said. But nothing would be enough. So it will have to do. He was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks after the warehouse. He walked out under his own power, which Cale had expressed early concern about, and which Dante had overruled with the specific, decisive calm of a man who had made his assessment and was not interested in revising it. I was in the garden when he arrived back at the estate. He came to find me. He walked along the path between the roses with the slight adjustment in his movement that the shoulder wound still required, and he stopped where I was standing. We looked at each other. I thought about everything between the alley and this garden. 5 years and a wall of photographs and a warehouse and a plastic hospital chair and a hand over mine and a tear wiped from my cheek. I told you 2 days, he said. You have been here considerably longer. You did not seem to want me to leave, I said. I never wanted you to leave, he said. But I want you to choose to stay. He reached into his jacket. He placed something in my hand. Is heavy. The specific keys I had seen on the hook by the front entrance. The ones that controlled the estate's main gate. The gate, he said, opens from the inside or the outside. The choice is yours. I looked at the keys in my hand. I thought about the girl who had crouched in an alley in the rain because she could not walk away from someone who needed help. I thought about the woman I had become in the years since, who had built walls around the memory of that girl because walls felt like safety, who had chosen the wrong man twice, once as a fiancé and once as an enemy, and who was standing in a rose garden at 30 with the right man's keys in her hand. I looked at Dante. I looked at the path that led to the gate. I closed my hand around the keys. Then I put them back in his jacket pocket. I kidnapped you to save your life, he said quietly. The words from the conversation I had reconstructed in my mind from the things he had said across the weeks of this strange and complicated beginning. I know, I said. I was going to let you go to save my soul. I know that too, I said. But I am not going anywhere. He looked at me. Alessia, he said. The way he said it. The way he had always said it, like the word itself mattered to him. Like it was not just a name but the name of something he had been careful with for a long time. Tell me something true, I said. The way I should have asked you from the beginning. He was quiet for a moment. I am not a good man, he said. I have done things that require the kind of honesty that does not make for comfortable telling. I will not pretend otherwise. He paused. But I have spent 5 years making sure you were safe from a distance. And 2 weeks trying to show you who I actually am, rather than who I have been told to be. And I will spend however long you give me doing both of those things from somewhere considerably closer. I looked at him. The dark eyes. At the man from the alley who had become the man in the rose garden who had become, across the most unlikely sequence of events I could have imagined. The man standing in front of me with his keys back in his pocket and everything else still entirely unresolved but somehow, against all available odds, beginning. That, I said, is a very honest beginning. We walked back toward the house together. Thought about Luca. About my father. About everything that needed grieving and everything that needed building. And the specific complicated nature of a life that had arrived at something real through the most difficult possible route. Some things I was learning did not arrive by the easy road. Some things arrived through alleys and warehouses and plastic hospital chairs and rose gardens and a pair of keys returned to a pocket. But they arrived. And when they did, they were worth everything they had cost to reach. To everyone who ever dismissed something real because it arrived in a form they did not expect. To everyone who held on to the wrong thing because it looked right from the outside. And to everyone who found, eventually, that the person who stayed in the alley when they could have run was the one they should have been looking for all along. Love does not always arrive on time or by the expected route. But it arrives. If this story reached you, please like, share and leave a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you longest. Check the link below for a book worth reading on love, truth, and the courage it takes to finally look clearly at the person standing in front of you. Take care of yourselves. We will see you in the next story.